So quickly, from an investment standpoint, SOZO is our new connected device. Now, I'll get into more of the connectivity, but we have an extraordinary means, non-invasively, of measuring fluid in the human body and tissue. We're commercially launched in Australia, in the United States, and in Europe for lymphedema and for a number of other indications in Europe and Australia for heart failure, renal failure, and so forth. We have filed with the FDA for heart failure for our new device. Heart failure, to understand, is the single largest healthcare market in the world today. We are expecting significant news flow over the next 6 months. This is a list of major achievements over the last 12 months since our last AGM. I would say, instead of going through these, I think there's 3 key takeaways here. 1, significant regulatory clearances. So we've got a new device that has been cleared both by the FDA, European and Australian regulators. A number of new data points from a clinical standpoint, and we have now completed the refresh of our board, moving from an R&D company to a commercial company. So let me talk about our technology for a moment. We have a unique technology. We send 256 frequencies throughout the body. We measure how fast or how slow those frequencies travel. We do this in tenths of a second, and we have a great detailed makeup of the human body from a fluid standpoint, both intercellular and extracellular fluid, tissue, muscle, and fat. And all of that provides us great insight into a number of clinical diseases. Our state-of-the-art device that we just introduced replaces our older generation device, but from this device standpoint, this device takes 20 seconds to conduct a test that I just talked about. So this replaces our older device that takes up to 20 minutes. We don't need an exam room any longer, gel-backed electrodes. This fits into the patient care continuum. And more importantly, it provides an extraordinary amount of information to clinicians where they can manage their patients. It's also remotely connected. You can place these throughout the entire hospital and consolidate all of the patient information into a single location and manage those patients. We are also cleared to place these devices in an at-home setting to manage chronically ill patients. Let's get into the cancer. I think the critical takeaway here is we have worked very hard since 2007 in the cancer space. Today there's more than 15 million cancer survivors in the U.S. There's a 1 in 3 chance that those cancer patients will develop lymphedema in their lifetimes. What's more importantly, though, is that cancer patients have a 15-fold increase in the risk of developing heart failure because of their cancer treatment. So we were pushed to go into heart failure by these very large cancer centers that said, if you can detect small fluid shifts in the human body for lymphedema, could we use this technology to detect the onset and management of heart failure patients? So if you'll notice this picture on the left, that's a woman whose left arm has been affected by lymphedema. That's chronic, it's lifelong, it will have to be treated for the rest of her life. Our device in that center slide, it's a woman who's being tested. Again, that test takes 20 seconds to conduct. That patient can use that device at home or in a clinical setting, and it's simply just putting on a compression sleeve. We can detect small fluid shifts from arm to arm or leg to leg as small as 35 milliliters, and it takes a simple compression sleeve or stocking to reduce the onset of lymphedema. I can tell you the clinical studies would show that we have a 90 to 95% rate of lack of progression to chronic lymphedema. Now, I think a lot of people are looking at the PREVENT trial. Our PREVENT trial is a trial that we undertook a number of years ago. It's considered the highest form of clinical trial you can do. It's a blinded, randomized, multi-center study. 1,100 patients who will be followed for 3 years. Today we have 1,070 patients, so we're 30 patients short of full enrollment. However, we will get interim data results in the coming months. The clinical investigator, the principal investigator, has confirmed that there's 2 publications currently in process. So we should see the clinical data results, and then the other publication is unknown. I would speculate, though, it's probably to do something to alert physicians on protocol changes, how to better manage patients, some insights that they've seen. So again, very, very positive from the PREVENT trial update. This slide talks about 2 different aspects of the trial. So the upper right-hand corner, I just want to draw everybody's attention. This was a patient that was in the original study that was done in 2000. Now that patient, you can see that that patient's fluid is monitored from pre-surgery all the way up to when she developed clinical grade lymphedema. At that time, they had no idea whether our technology could detect it before the gold standard. And the gold standard globally today is a tape measure where they're looking for volume changes. Well, you could see that in the LDEX trial that we picked it up 4 months after surgery, and it wasn't until 13 months later that they were able to detect it with a tape measure. Now, once it gets in the red, that patient is chronic and lifelong, and it's difficult for them ever to reverse that condition. Now, go below to the second graph there. That's a more recent patient. That patient was tested with our device. That patient started to spike, which meant there was fluid building up in the lymphatic system. They were able to put a simple sleeve on that patient. They were able to bring her back down to a normal range, and that patient today does not have any visible signs of lymphedema. She's obviously at high risk. She's got a compromised lymphatic system, but she is normal, and she's tested regularly for her potential to move into another clinical, to move into clinical grade lymphedema. Now, we have our trial coming out. There is a huge body of evidence that is currently building today. There's 2 trials that were released earlier in the year. One was by Dr. Kaufman. He followed 200 patients for 6 years. 0 patients progressed on to clinical grade lymphedema, even though he detected 10 of them were moving into subclinical. They were aggressively treated, and those patients all returned to a normal level. There was a second trial that was completed, more than 600, almost 600 patients for 6 years, 12%. Moved into a subclinical state. They were treated, and only 3% ever went on to develop lymphedema. Now, the literature would say that those patients, 7% to 36% of those 600 patients should have gone on to develop lymphedema. This is a significant result. Now, these 2 surgeons are some of the most respected breast cancer surgeons in the United States. Now, there's also a major cancer congress coming up, and 4 papers were accepted. You'll notice on the right-hand side of the slide there are 4 major papers that were accepted. They'll be presented on December 5th at this cancer congress. You can tell from the titles that these are all going to be very positive. In addition to the growing clinical evidence, the guidelines for cancer care in the United States are increasing significantly. I will tell you that 3 years ago we had 1. And today we have 4 major guidelines talking about the fact that you should be using and educating and working with your patients to prevent them or at least help them through the stages of lymphedema. Probably the more important one is the one on the extreme left there. The APTA recommends using our device by name, bioimpedance spectroscopy, for measuring patients who are undergoing surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. They also recommend that if you're a cancer survivor, you've never had a pre-surgical baseline, that you should be tested immediately and followed with our device. So this was a big achievement for the company. We'll continue to provide information to them when all these clinical trials come out. We'll certainly reapply for all the guidelines to increase that not only the use of our device, but inclusion of our device in those guidelines. This slide just goes back to the original premise that we have. This is a very large market in the cancer space. Today we see the addressable market is at $1.8 billion opportunity. These patients are tested on a quarterly basis or 17 times over 5 years. The enhancement that we're going to be seeing with our new device is not only will we have the recognized revenue for the current quarter, all of these cancer centers today are signing up for 1-year or 2-year contracts, which is a big change for our business. They used to buy our consumables whenever they thought they needed them. Today, the minimum they can sign up for is a patient population that would get tested during a given year and up to 2 years. So we'll not only see current revenue, we'll see deferred revenue and total contract value coming out. So I think it'll be much easier to follow our journey into commercialization. On the right-hand side, gives you an idea of the types of cancer centers we're going after. There's approximately 1,700 in the U.S. We're going after the top 500. We continue to make progress today. There's 121 cancer centers using our product, and we continue to build on that. We believe with the new advent of our device, it will actually see a much bigger uptake. So we just started the commercialization less than a month ago in the U.S. So we are going to our largest cancer centers. We are going to the key opinion leaders in those marketplace. We've had great acceptance. We're currently in contract negotiations with a number of them to completely switch out of our old device to our new device. The major difference here is most of these larger cancer centers had one of our devices. They're now looking for multiples of devices, 3 or 4 devices, and they're also looking for multi-year contracts for the testing of these patients. I think with the advent or the publication of Dr. Whitworth's data, we're seeing a renewed interest in the product and what we can do to significantly improve patients' outcomes while significantly reducing cost. We'll continue to see new customers. We've been approached by a couple centers to become centers of excellence where they want to start testing all of their cancer patients who are at risk of developing lymphedema. They believe that the cost offset more than weighs the fact that they don't have full reimbursement yet. Later next year, we'll introduce bilateral cancer. So if you have a double mastectomy or if you have gynecological or urological cancers or melanoma that require lymph nodes removed from both sides of your body, we'll be able to start testing for that. Now, what does that mean for our business? That means all of our older devices, hundreds of them throughout the world, will automatically be obsoleted because the older device does not or cannot detect unilateral in any simple way, and it's not cleared to do so. So the new device will introduce new software later next year to be able to do that. We'll also expand into private pay. We also said in a number of roadshows before this that our big catalyst was getting private pay. Today, hospitals can seek reimbursement from the federal government for those patients who are over age 65 and who have cancer. The private payers have not come on to date. They were looking for a large multi-center randomized trial, which I said earlier would be coming out later this year or early next year. Chronic heart failure. This was the space that we were pushed into very hard by the cancer centers. I can tell you that one publication calls this a global pandemic. 26 million people today suffer from heart failure. If you're age 40 or older, you have a 1 in 5 chance of dying of heart failure or developing heart failure. It's the most common cause of hospitalizations for age 65 years and older. And it is the single largest healthcare expense globally. Every government, every insurance company who handles these types of patients, it is their single largest line item. In the U.S. alone, it's a $31 billion problem on an annualized basis, affecting 6.5 million patients a year and growing. And this is expected to go up to $70 billion a year by 2030. And really what they're looking for is when a patient goes into heart failure, their heart becomes very inefficient. So it starts to pump harder, trying to force more fluid throughout the heart, more blood, more oxygen. And with that, it starts to pool fluid outside the cell walls into the lungs. That's why you hear congestive heart failure. I'm having trouble breathing. You have fluid building in their abdomen and in their ankles. So today there is 2 ways to manage heart failure. One is put a scale in somebody's home. They weigh themselves every day. And if that patient gains 2 kilos of weight in 48 hours, they're assuming they have 2 liters of excess fluid and they need to be treated. On the other extreme, there is an implantable that is permanently implanted in your aorta. They're looking for pressure changes in your heart brought on by fluid. And typically those take between 1 and 3 liters of fluid in order for it to register. Our device can measure 1/10 of a liter of fluid. And we can do it accurately, we can do it non-invasively, and like I said, we can do it in less than 20 seconds. So we believe that our value proposition here is to have the accuracy and sensitivity of an implantable device at the cost of a scale. And today, an implantable device is about $25,000 for the device and another $30,000 to $40,000 for the hospitalization cost. And a scale today is placed in patients' homes at $150 per month. So our heart failure program is making progress. We have filed with the FDA for heart failure. We expect to get a clearance from the FDA to commercialize heart failure in the United States beginning at the end of this year or early next year. So our application is in the final process of going through that. We already have clearance to sell it for heart failure in Australia and in Europe. We have a couple marketing trials currently going on. So understand these are marketing trials. We have one at the world famous Scripps Institute where they're managing patients using our device, and we'll have another 2 starting, one at the Mayo Clinic and one at Lancaster General, 2 of the U.S.'s largest heart failure centers. Again, these are small patient populations. It's 30 patients for no more than 30 days. There's already favorable reimbursement in place, so something that we have been fighting on the lymphedema side for more than a decade is not an issue in the heart failure space. And again, we will start to commercialize this next year once we get the clearances. And like the cancer space, this is also a very large opportunity. The addressable market here is in excess of $1 billion, and that's a very conservative number. That assumes that our device is placed in people's homes at $60 a month. And I told you earlier that the scale companies were at 150. So if we just went up to that number, obviously it's a multiple of billions of dollars here. So we feel very good about the opportunity in this space to track small fluid changes that can lead to better outcomes for these patients. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing with our device and why people are looking at multiple devices here. Currently, our average account has 1.2 of our older devices. This new device, this connected device, they're looking at placing them throughout the entire patient care continuum, in the surgery center so they can get a pre-surgical baseline, in the imaging center where the patients come for the first year or two on a quarterly basis, survivorship clinic, and or physical therapy. And in those areas, they can manage these patients, they can collect all of that data, and if those patients start to trend out to a critical stage, they can treat them and bring them back to a normal state. Expected news flow. We'll fully enroll the PREVENT trial later this year. We're less than 30 patients from full enrollment. We'll get our interim data out this year. There'll be 2 publications coming out. You'll see some centers of excellence announced who expand beyond just their current Medicare patient population. There'll be a number of new abstracts and clinical data coming out. We fully expect when all of this is in the market, we'll start to see private pay coverage coming out for our LDEX in the cancer space. In heart failure, as I said earlier, you'll see clearance from the Food and Drug Administration later this year or early next year, and then we'll start the commercial launch of that. We'll complete our small marketing studies and move into a much larger marketing study. The larger marketing study will be no more than 400 patients, followed for no more than 90 days. So it will be a small number of patients followed for a very short period of time. The reason heart failure clinical studies are so short in duration is 90 days is the ultimate penalty period for the federal government. So if you get so they're looking at today is if a patient comes back to the hospital after 30 days, that hospital has to eat the entire cost. Medicare will not reimburse for that. That's going to 60 days, going to 90 days. So the trials are short in duration. They're just looking at that short time period when they come under the federal government's scrutiny for either penalties and or lack of reimbursement for their hospital stays. Last thing I just wanted to go over, we have, as I said earlier, we have a board refresh going on. Dr. Cheryl Hirsch is stepping down after 12 years. She's retiring. 6 years as the chairman. We are going to miss her. Scott Ward is stepping up to the chairman of the board, more than 30 years with the largest medical device company in the world, Medtronic. Replacing Cheryl is Dr. Robert Graham from the world-famous Victor Chang Cardiology Research Institute in Sydney. And we're very pleased with that. He's a world-renowned cardiologist, very familiar with heart failure, and he will be stepping in and he will be appointed at the upcoming AGM next week. And we have a number of new additions that I think will help us move from an R&D company up through commercial state.